Bronze shields slam against Israelite lines, sparks jump, and a giant named Goliath roars across a valley. Fast forward centuries and the battlefield is gone. Only broken statues lie under ash on the coast of modern Israel. The Bible casts the Philistines as the bad guys, enemies of Samson, Delilah's co-conspirators, the people David had to beat to become king. But were they really villains, or was their story something darker? Refugees of a shattered age who carried the blame for a world in freefall. Recent digs show a culture rich in color, red and black pottery, carved ivory combs, barley beer shared in tall cups. Their streets held smiths who knew iron years before their neighbors, and traders who spoke with accents from across the sea. They may have fled the collapse of mighty empires and washed up on Canaan's shores looking for a fresh start, only to be written into history as Israel's eternal foe. Over the next half hour, we'll trace that journey. How the fall of Bronze Age giants pushed a wave of migrants into the Levant. How those newcomers forged a small but fierce kingdom, and how, within 3 centuries, they themselves vanished, leaving only burned cities and a name that still works as an insult. By the end, we'll ask, when scripture calls someone an enemy, is that the whole truth, or just the loudest voice that survived? Around 1200 BC, the map of the eastern Mediterranean looked as if someone had kicked an anthill. Trade routes that had pumped copper, wine, and grain for centuries snapped overnight. Hittite kings vanished from their fortresses in what is now Turkey. Mycenaean palaces in Greece burned, their storerooms still packed with bronze blades that never got used. Even Egypt, the superpower of the age, fought for its life against waves of outsiders that later scholars simply called Sea Peoples. One of those groups shows up on Ramses III's battle relief at Medinet Habu. The carving labels them Peliset, men in feathered headdresses, round shields strapped to their forearms, families and ox carts rolling behind their ships. The Egyptians pushed them back, but they didn't disappear. Instead, many sailed east and hugged the coast until they reached the sandy plains of southern Canaan, roughly today's Gaza Strip and coastal Israel. There they put down roots that would grow into the people we know as the Philistines. Clues to their origin come from the ground. Dig into the earliest Philistine layers at Ashkelon or Ekron, and you find jars painted in bold red and black swirls, shapes almost identical to pottery made in the Aegean 2 or 3 generations earlier. In those same layers, animal bones pile up, and more than a few are pig. That stands out because local Canaanites and future Israelites avoided pork. Aegean sailors, on the other hand, roasted plenty of it. Add in loom weights shaped like spindles common in Mycenaean Greece, and you get a picture of migrants who packed their kitchen habits and craft styles along with their spears. They did not drift ashore as a single mob. Over maybe 20 years, they settled 5 key cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, close enough for mutual defense, yet far enough to run their own councils. Archaeologists call this network the Philistine Pentapolis. Each city rings a tell, a man-made mound about 100 to 200 feet high. Inside those walls, storehouses for grain, workshops for iron tools, and cult places with altars sized for burnt offerings, much larger than the goat sacrifices next-door Canaanites preferred. Were they conquerors? Partly. They arrived armed and took prime coastal farmland. But invasion feels too neat. The entire region was already cracked by drought and refugee traffic. Many towns lay half-empty, their fortifications ruined. Into that vacuum came sailing families in search of land that could still grow barley. Think less of an organized army and more of wagon trains armed to the teeth because the road behind them was on fire. Egypt's own letters hint at this nuance. One papyrus complains the Peliset settled within my borders, but also notes they farmed and paid grain like everyone else once things calmed down. It sounds less like ongoing war and more like an edgy new neighbor you have to watch. By 1150 BC, the Philistines were firmly dug in. Their port at Ashkelon hummed with merchants from Cyprus and the Nile Delta. Blacksmiths in Gath hammered out iron spearheads, tougher than the bronze models most Highlanders still used. In a world where every other great house was falling, the Pentapolis looked like a rare success story. Refugees who turned ruin into opportunity. But this stability came with a price. The fertile strip they claimed also served as the land bridge between Egypt and the rising Israelite tribes in the hill country. Two expanding cultures with clashing diets, gods, and trade interests were now eye to eye. Friction was inevitable, and it is through that friction, recorded later in Hebrew scripture, that the Philistines became history's go-to villains. Before the conflict heats up, we need to hold on to one fact. The people later described as Goliath's kin began not as cartoon foils, but as families displaced by the largest collapse the Bronze Age had ever seen. Their story starts with survival, not villainy, a point worth remembering when the battles begin. The newcomers who planted their flags along Canaan's coast did not stay foreign for long. Step into Ashkelon or Ekron about 1120 BC, and the streets feel like a cultural crossroads. Houses line straight lanes instead of the usual maze. Evidence of town planning learned in the larger Aegean ports. Grain silos built from mud brick cylinders stand 20 feet tall, each with stone linings to keep rats out and wheat dry. Close by, smithies ring anvils late into the night, forging iron knives that can cut leather in a single pull, an edge most of their Bronze Age neighbors can't match. Walk through the market and the pottery alone tells a story of fusion. Bowls are thrown in the old Aegean shape, wide, shallow, perfect for stews, yet painted in a style local workshops are just starting to copy, red and black waves on a cream slip. Archaeologists label this bichrome ware. Look closer and the fish scale motif around the rim is Canaanite, taken from earlier coastal jars. The handles curl in a Mycenaean loop, but the clay is Levantine. Each shard is a passport stamped with two homelands. At the butcher stands, something else catches the eye. Racks of pork ribs hanging beside goat and lamb. Even before formal Hebrew law, many inland Canaanite towns already avoided pigs, and the Torah later codified the taboo. Yet Philistine menus embrace them. Dig up trash pits in Ashdod, and pig bones make up a quarter of all animal remains. Their cooks also press grapes into a robust wine stored in two-handled craters, Aegean style. Hebrew prophets will later sneer at drunkards of Ashkelon, but in the 11th century BC, wine is simply part of Philistine daily bread. Religion mixes just as freely. Excavators at Ekron uncovered a monumental inscription to a goddess called Potnia, a Greek word for lady, but the same sanctuary held figurines of Baal in the classic Canaanite smiting pose. Another temple at Gaza shows evidence of corn offerings to Dagon, a grain god linked both to local Semitic lore and to older Aegean harvest rites. Instead of stamping out local worship, the Philistines seem to build a layered pantheon: sea gods from home, crop gods from their new fields, storm gods impressive enough to calm desert winters. Clay altars carry bull horns at the corners, Minoan in spirit, yet burn frankincense traded down from Arabia. Trade is the bloodstream. Philistine ports move cedar from Lebanon south to Egypt. In return, they receive faience beads, scarabs, and linen. Israelite shepherds in the hill country buy iron sickles and bronze cauldrons stamped with geometric waves. One tablet fragment from Tel Kassil records an invoice: 2 goats, 1 jar oil, 3 shekels silver, delivered to Philistine captain. Even the feared Gath sends barley to inland markets during drought years. Excavations at Tel Esaphat, biblical Gath, find storage jars in hillside caves, suggesting surplus meant for exchange, not hoarding. Diplomacy follows commerce. A small ivory seal from Ekron shows a winged sphinx above a cartouche of Pharaoh Siamun, evidence that the Philistines kept at least cordial links with Egypt. In the opposite direction, a few early Israelite inscriptions borrow Philistine loanwords, Seren for lord, Koba for certain cooking pots. Shared vocabulary hints at neighbors who argue, trade, and sometimes borrow recipes. The military side still exists. Bastions at Ashdod run 8 feet thick, enough to absorb a battering ram. Philistine cities hire foreign mercenaries, Lycians, Nubians, adding to their melting pot vibe. But most layers at these sites show long spans of peaceful growth. New housing blocks, expanded marketplaces, repaired water tunnels. The day-to-day priority is clear: feed people, make tools, move goods. Behind these material signs hides a social order that scholars are only starting to map. Linear scripts never catch on here. Ledgers stay on perishable papyrus or in memory. But household layouts suggest extended families living under one roof, shared courtyards with communal bread ovens, and small shrines at neighborhood crossroads where travelers leave oil or grain before starting long journeys. A terracotta Ashdoda figurine, half throne, half goddess, turns up in dozens of homes, perhaps a local protector of childbirth and safe voyages. Women seem to hold economic clout. Grinding stones cluster by doorways rather than in back rooms, signaling that bread production is both public and valued. Spindle whorls carved from imported bone sit beside measuring weights, hinting that cloth manufacture is a cottage industry managed at the household level. Among grave goods, women's burials sometimes outshine men's, stocked with cosmetic palettes, silver earrings, and the rare iron needle, resources too pricey to waste on the unimportant. All this activity reshapes the coastal plain. Forests of oak and terebinth give way to wheat fields. Pig farmers clear scrub that once hid bandits. Roadside caravanseries sprout between Gaza and Ekron, their courtyards echoing with 5 or 6 languages. Judges in inland Israelite towns grumble about uncircumcised Philistines, but when they need a good sword, they still send traders west. Hybrid culture leaves hybrid fingerprints. Philistine kilns shift from Aegean-style bichrome to more local monochrome wear over 2 generations, yet continue to add stylized birds lifted from earlier island art. Burial customs start with flexed crouch positions familiar in Greece, then slide toward extended supine poses common in Canaan. Even genetics tells a mixed story. DNA from 10th century BC remains at Ashkelon shows an early spike of Southern European ancestry that blends into local Levantine genes within 200 years. By Solomon's reign, a Philistine might carry her grandmother's Aegean cheekbones and her grandfather's Canaanite surname. Calling these people invaders misses the reality on the ground. They arrive as outsiders, carve a foothold, but within a lifetime they are as local as the barley they grow and as connected to the sea as ever. Their distinctiveness lies not in pure heritage, but in the blend, a recipe equal parts Mycenaean resilience and Levantine adaptability. This coastal experiment in fusion prospers for about 2 centuries, long enough to worry Israel's tribal confederacy, long enough to earn a heavy profile in scripture, but short compared to Egypt's millennia. When Assyrian armies appear on the horizon, the Philistines will learn how fragile a hybrid kingdom can be. For now, though, the Pentapolis is a bright engine on the shoreline, humming with iron, pork fat, and the low murmur of trade deals inked over mugs of strong reddish wine. The Hebrew Bible picks up the Philistine story at street level, where coastal grain meets high country pasture, and neither side is willing to blink. In the book of Judges, the tension crystallizes around Samson, a Nazarite with uncut hair and a temper as quick as a spark. Samson marries a Philistine woman from Timnah, wagers riddles over wine, then lashes out when her kin cheat the bet. He ties 300 foxes tail to tail, sets them ablaze, and looses them through Philistine barley fields, torching a year's food in one night. Retaliation follows. Philistines raid Judah. Judah's elders hand Samson over. Samson snaps the ropes, and an improvised jawbone becomes a 1,000-man disaster. The cycle of insult and payback feels less like holy war and more like two proud communities arguing through their strongest hotheads. Delilah enters as a local woman bribed by Philistine lords, called Saranim, to uncover the secret of Samson's strength. Her city, Gaza, likely offered her a hefty weight of silver, the sort of civic payout reserved for strategic assets. Samson finally yields, his hair is shaved, and the strongman turns millstone slave until one last feat topples a temple full of celebrants. The text frames the Philistines as treacherous, yet it also shows them organized. They pool money, run jails, even host grand festivals that pack thousands under one roof. Villains, yes, but villains with infrastructure. Move forward a generation, and the battleground shifts to the Elah Valley, where a champion named Goliath, height given as 6 cubits and a span, a little over 9 feet, strides between armies in bronze scale that glints like a fish's back. His spear shaft is like a weaver's beam, roughly 2.5 inches thick. He shouts for single combat, echoing Aegean warrior codes where duels settled wider disputes. Into that arena steps David, the shepherd boy carrying a staff and 5 river-smooth stones. 1 slingshot, 1 forehead strike, and Philistine lines buckle. The moral lesson is clear: faith beats force, but tucked beneath is realpolitik. Israelite slings were legendary. At shorter than 150 feet, they could punch a stone through bronze. Goliath's helmet, if it followed typical Philistine style, might have left his brow unguarded, a design quirk with roots in the Aegean. The underdog story doubles as a practical note on weapon matchups. King Saul's reign turns the skirmishes into full campaigns. The Philistines field iron weapons earlier than most Israelites, giving them an edge in open terrain. Saul counters by fortifying highland passes and staging ambushes at Michmash. The chronicler of 1 Samuel admits Philistine blacksmiths were so vital that Israelite farmers paid them in grain just to sharpen plowshares. That's admiration wrapped in anxiety. The enemy's tech keeps your food supply alive even as his army threatens. David, once in Saul's service, eventually flees to Philistine territory, taking refuge with Achish, king of Gath. Achish assigns him the town of Ziklag, a safe haven in exchange for border raids on mutual foes. The episode paints Philistine leadership as pragmatic. They'll hire an ex-enemy if it plugs a security gap. When Philistine lords suspect David might switch sides mid-battle, they dismiss him, but pay his men first. Shrewd, cautious, businesslike. Throughout these chapters, the Bible never calls Philistines idol-worshipping monsters. It notes their gods, Dagon in Ashdod, Baal-zebub in Ekron, yet the polemic centers on political threat, not cosmic evil. The Pentapolis lords are Saranim, a term the text translates as rulers, sometimes even friends, when diplomacy is in play. Their cities are walled, their chariots numerous, their infantry disciplined. Israelite prophets condemn them, but in the same breath envy their iron and fear their discipline. Both sides share habits despite taboos. They feast on wine, measure wealth in livestock, and swear oaths before altars. They trade prisoners, ransom captured Ark relics, and respect ceasefires for burials. In 1 Samuel 6, Philistines return the Ark of the Covenant on a new cart pulled by cows, include gold plague replicas as guilt offerings, and send it rolling uphill to Beth Shemesh. That scene is less villainous than diplomatically precise. They recognize the power of Israel's God and follow local ritual etiquette in hopes the plagues will lift. So are the Philistines evil or merely the other in a tight land corridor? The text itself gives clues. After Saul dies on Mount Gilboa, Philistines fasten his body to Beth-shan's wall. Men from Jabesh Gilead, Israelite allies, cross the Jordan at night to rescue the corpse. An act of bravery, yes, but also proof that the wall remains lightly guarded. The Philistines aren't an overwhelming empire. They're strong towns with limited reach, pushing inland, testing defenses, receiving pushback. The biblical record, then, is less a saga of pure good versus pure evil and more a frontier journal. Border raids, shifting alliances, cultural misunderstandings hardened into stereotypes. The Pentapolis and the 12 tribes are like two neighboring families who share a well. Each thinks the other draws too much water. Over time, every quarrel turns bigger in the telling until the Philistines wear permanent black hats in Israel's memory. Understanding that context doesn't erase the faith lessons of David and Samson, but it does reposition them in human history. Moments where two young societies clashed, each convinced the land was theirs by right, each narrating itself as the hero. It's a mirror worth holding up because later Assyrians will do to the Philistines what the Philistines once threatened to do to Israel, proof that in the ancient Near East, yesterday's foe could become tomorrow's cautionary tale. When David is said to have unified the hill tribes and captured Jerusalem, the Philistines lose the one thing they could always count on: a divided opponent. The new Israelite kingdom stretches from the highlands straight down to the western valleys, cutting into trade routes that once fed the Pentapolis. The Bible has recorded only a few late clashes. David's men push the Philistines back to their coastal plain, and Solomon later signs trade deals through their ports. But the real story of Philistine decline unfolds in the dirt, layer by layer. Archaeologists digging at Ashdod and Ekron see no single burn layer that screams Israelite conquest. Instead, they find slow decay. The top of the city wall collapses and gets patched with cheaper mud brick. Iron workshops that once roared with charcoal fires scale back to small household furnaces. Imported luxury goods, Egyptian faience, Cypriot copper, appear less often in burial goods. Grain silos empty out and get reused as trash pits. By about 980 BC, the fancy bichrome pottery we saw earlier shifts to plainer local wear. Aegean motifs fade, Canaanite styles take over. Culture is blending, and the distinctive Philistine flavor is thinning out. External pressure speeds the process. To the northeast, a revived Aramean state at Damascus elbows into inland trade. To the southwest, Egypt regains stability and starts flexing at the border again. Meanwhile, inland Israel controls key ridge routes. The Pentapolis is caught in the middle, still wealthy, but squeezed. Philistine lords rely on mercenaries more and more, paying them with land instead of silver. That dilutes both treasury and identity. Many newcomers march in speaking Phoenician or Aramaic and stay to raise families. Then come the Assyrians. In 734 BC, Tiglath-Pileser III sweeps down the coast with siege engines and a reputation for flaying rebels alive. Gaza surrenders and pays heavy tribute. 10 years later, Ashkelon tries to revolt. Sargon II crushes it and drags its king in chains to Nineveh. Reliefs from Sargon's palace show Philistine prisoners, their feathered headdresses now symbols of defeat. Massive tribute lists include wheat, wine, and, tellingly, iron spearheads, as if the very tools once used for defense are being carted off as spoils. Ekron hangs on longest. In 1996, excavators found an inscription dedicating a temple to a queen named Atalia. Her script is Phoenician, her religion a hybrid of local and foreign gods. The stone dates to the late 7th century BC, proving that by then Philistine elites spoke the coastal lingua franca, not their old tongue. 20 years after that dedication, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon razes Ashkelon and marches prisoners east. Gath disappears from history. Its tell shrinks to a village mound. Gaza survives as a port but under foreign governors, first Babylonian, then Persian. By the 5th century BC, official Persian documents still label the strip Philistia, yet no text mentions Philistine kings, culture, or language. The term is now just geographic shorthand, like calling a spot on the map Gaul long after Gaulish has died out. Pottery, burial customs, even the local diet match broader Levant trends. Pig bones fall to levels similar to Judah. Greek amphorae flood in, filled with wine from new colonies. The feathered crest helmets vanish altogether. So how did a people who once stood toe-to-toe with Israel and traded with Egypt fade without a final blaze of glory? Partly because slow erosion is harder to notice than a single conquest. Philistine cities adapted, hired outsiders, swapped gods, and merged fashions until Philistine no longer marked a clear border. When the big empires arrived, Assyria first, Babylon second, there wasn't enough cohesion left to mount united resistance. The Pentapolis fell city by city, treaty by treaty, tribute by tribute, until only Gaza's harbor lights glinted on the sea. Their afterlife would be linguistic. Greek writers turned Philistia into Palaestina, later Latinized as Palestina. Long after the people vanished, the label lived on, applied to a region hosting entirely new cultures. Ironically, the name of an outsider group became the fixed geographic identity of the coast they once colonized. Back at Ashkelon's tell, the last Philistine stratum holds signs of hurried abandonment. Broken storage jars, a collapsed roof beam charred by a brief fire, children's beads left in the corner of a room. Not a massacre, just a family leaving in haste as new armies approached. The next layer belongs to a Babylonian garrison who reuse the same streets but refill the grain silos with their own pottery and stamp their own official seals on cargo jars. The thread of continuity snaps there. Whatever songs or stories the Philistines once told fade into the general hum of Levantine life. Their fall, then, isn't a single tragic ending, but a slow unweaving. Influence drains away, walls crumble at the edges, cultures mingle, and a proud name becomes a footnote. The Bible remembers them as Goliath's people. The ground remembers them as Aegean craftsmen turned Canaanite farmers. Imperial archives remember them only as taxpayers. By the Persian period, they are ghosts, visible only when we stack pottery shards in chronological order and see color leach from bold red and black to a common brown. Your enemy today can be your neighbor tomorrow, and in the shuffle of empires, even powerful neighbors can quietly disappear. The Philistines burst onto the southern coast as hardy survivors of a shattered age, rose to challenge Israel's early kings, and then slipped into the sands they once farmed. Today, most people meet them only as Goliath's tribe, the loud warriors who dared oppose God's chosen people. Yet the archaeology paints a more broad picture. Ship-borne families who blended Aegean craft with Canaanite know-how, founded planned cities, brewed wine, worked iron, and learned to bargain as quickly as they learned to raid. They fought, yes, but they also farmed, stitched linen, and carved ivory combs fine enough to pass for Egyptian court goods. So how did builders and traders become one-note villains? Partly timing. They settled the very land bridge Israel needed for growth. Border clashes make great stories, and Israel's scribes captured every victory in ink. The Philistines left no written rebuttal. No palace archive survived Assyrian fire, so later readers heard only one side. Like many post-collapse peoples, they were defined not by what they built, but by who defeated them. The irony is thick. Israelite texts kept the Philistines alive long after their cities fell. Without Samson's foxes or David's sling, the name might have faded with the last pot of bichrome paint. Instead, Philistine traveled through Greek translators, Latin editors, and medieval sermons until, by the 1700s, European writers used it as a slur for anyone who lacks culture. A nickname born of coastal refugees ended up mocking people who disliked opera. The word's journey didn't stop there. When Rome crushed the Second Jewish Revolt in 135 AD, it renamed the province Syria Palestina, reviving the old coastal label Philistia to dull Jewish claims. Centuries later, Arabic speakers pronounced the region Philistin, and British maps shortened it to Palestine. By then, the actual Philistines had been gone for 2,000 years. Their name outlived their language, religion, even their DNA, an echo detached from its source, carried forward by each new power that needed a tag for the land. What do we make of that echo? First, it warns us that history often keeps the words of the winners and loses the stories of the losers. Second, it shows how fast reputations can freeze. The Philistines were never just raiders. They were migrants who adapted fast, mixed freely, and left the coast richer than they found it, until stronger empires rolled in. Finally, their tale reminds us that labels travel farther than people. Today's headlines use Palestine to describe a modern national struggle, yet the word's root lies with seafaring families who once hung boar tusk helmets in the markets of Ashkelon. So were the Philistines villains or victims? They were both, and neither, ordinary humans pushed by catastrophe, carving out a new start, clashing with neighbors trying to do the same. Their true legacy is the caution that a single story, especially one written by an enemy, can mask a far richer past. If we want to judge them fairly, we must listen through the noise of sling stones and temple pillars, and hear the quieter sounds too. The hiss of iron on the anvil, the chatter of traders at the gate, the lull of sea wind in a hybrid city that stood for 3 vibrant centuries on Canaan's shore. Every epic needs a foe. For ancient Israel, that role fell to the Philistines. Yet walk the ruined streets of Ashkelon, sift the ash of burned Ekron, or study the red and black cups left in Gath, and the story widens. We meet refugees steering crowded ships through a collapsing world, settlers who laid out new cities with grain silos and smithy blocks, traders who swapped wine for cedar and learned the local tongue. Yes, they fought, hard and often, but battle was only one chapter in a much larger book. I'm not trying to discredit or disrespect the Bible. I'm aiming to enrich it. Scripture preserves the passion of border wars, while archaeology adds the everyday pulse. Family meals spiced with garlic and pork, workshops clanging with early iron, shrines where Aegean sea gods shared altars with Canaanite stormlords. Set side by side, the two records remind us that enemies are people first, labels second. The Philistines teach a second lesson too. History can keep a name while forgetting the lives behind it. Their culture fades, but their label survives, recycled by Rome, echoed in today's geography, even borrowed as an insult for someone uncultured. When we follow that label back through time, we recover voices nearly muted by fire and conquest, and we come away with a humbling truth. Tomorrow's villains may simply be today's strangers whose stories were never told. That's why journeys like this matter. They pull forgotten builders and farmers out from under centuries of rubble and let them speak again. They show that the past is not a single line of heroes and foes, but a web of overlapping struggles, hopes, and recoveries. When we honor both the sacred texts and the soil beneath our feet, we get closer to the full human picture. If you believe history deserves to be remembered in all its depth, stay with me. Click subscribe and join me as we uncover the long, winding story of the past, the fallen, the risen, and the echoes still shaping our world.